Welcome to the Ultimate Plot Twist podcast, where each time we meet, you'll hear stories from ordinary people like me and you who have found huge blessings from the most unexpected places. Hi, I'm your host, Jen Barger. I'm a wife and a mom to two amazing kids, one of which just happens to have Down syndrome. And when we were handed this challenging and yet quite rewarding plot twist, it was the stories, the people, the recommendations from others that has helped us the most. I can't wait to learn more from these amazing people together and hope that you too walk away feeling a little more encouraged, a little more equipped, and feeling much less alone. Let's get to it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Ultimate Plot Twist, where we share stories with families, friends, all the people, just to make sure that we have community and have a chance to hear from each other. And I'm so excited for us to spend some time with one of my online friends, a newer online friend. We actually just found out we live in the same town, so I'm pretty excited. We're going to have coffee soon. But this is Suz Conley. Suz comes from us, like I said, the Midwest. I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do first. Do you mind starting there?
Sure. So we are in each other's worlds because I kind of started this journey back in 2020 when COVID hit. I was just miserable in my own skin. I had put my kids first before me. You know, I was working a full-time corporate job that was pretty demanding. So I first wanted to focus on my health and wellness and try to just get back to myself again.
Yeah.
So I became a faster weight certified coach.
Suz, I never knew that.
Yes. So we'll have to talk about that sometime too.
Yeah.
So yes, I became a certified coach back in
Okay.
2020. Thought I could help other women with that, but quickly realized I didn't really want to brand myself like that. But I absolutely loved helping women, and I needed to figure out how I could do that. So I took my skill set of like being a project manager and started helping other coaches in the back end of their business. So that's kind of how we got connected through a mutual friend. And then I pivoted from there to realizing I can help other women actually start and grow their own businesses in the virtual space, even if they're juggling being a working mom. Like there are ways that you can do it. It's going to look different than someone who isn't a working mom, but you can still do something for yourself and generate additional income for your family. So that's like the very short version of who I am and what I do.
Yes, that's awesome. And that's very abbreviated. So Suz is very, very talented. She plays a lead role in our community in different ways too. And so, yes, you downplay that a bit, but that's a great summary. So tell me a little bit about your family.
Okay, so I'm married.
Okay.
I have two boys. One is 10, one is 7. Like I mentioned, I work full time. They go to school. We do not have, well, I have a unique family situation. I had to move away from my mom when I was 15. So I've been very independent and very on my own for a long time. And I didn't really think about that when having kids. I always wanted to be a mom just to probably like give back to what I didn't really receive, as a child. I'm a very motherly person. I'm the firstborn daughter, just like the responsible one that was always the mom of the group.
Right.
And I just love kids. And so I always thought, oh, we would have this big family, and then like the title of your podcast, Plot Twist, happened with my youngest.
So tell me about that. So you knew you wanted to have kids.
Yes.
This is your second child that gave you the surprise, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. So, my firstborn was a normal pregnancy. He was late. He didn't want to come out, all that stuff, the typical thing. Okay. He was so comfortable being in there. And then my second one, I was like, man, I just feel like something was off the whole time. And so I would really encourage you, if you feel like something is off, please speak up. I did not. I can tend to be more of a quiet person. I was going through to my appointments though and everything seemed to be tracking normally. But one day I went to my 35-week checkup and I was like, I'm going to speak up today. I'm going to say something just does not feel right. I haven't really felt him move. I don't know, just something feels off. Luckily, the doctor did listen to me, but she was like, oh, maybe he's just tired. Let's, have a snack. Let's hook you up to this monitor. Let's see, what's happening.
Right.
Nothing. They didn't see any kind of like, they were like, click this button if there's any movement. And there was none. So they were like, well, maybe, let's go for an ultrasound. Maybe you have a lot of fluid that's just like blocking you feeling him. And I was like, okay, that was probably the worst because I was there alone with the tech and they can't really say anything to you. I mean, I could see it. and he wasn't moving. And they were just like, how long has this been going on? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I'm feeling all the mom guilt of like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I spoke up as soon as I thought something was a problem. So I was like, well, I don't know. It's been happening for a while. So they were like, okay, well, we're going to take you down and we're going to just like take you over to the hospital and get you set up with monitors. But when I got there, they were like, okay, we're getting you ready for your emergency C-section. And I was like, wait a second, like, oh, my husband's not here. That's not what they just told me. I thought we were just coming over here for monitoring. And they're like, oh no, like we don't have time. We have to get this baby out right now.
Wow.
So my husband's home with our 2-year-old at the time.
Right.
We don't have family around. It's like rush hour. They were like, how quickly can he get here? And I was like, I don't know. Like we have to find someone to watch our
Right.
2-year-old.
I made no plans for that.
Yeah. So went in for an emergency C-section, and I did it alone. He couldn't make it in time. I was there alone.
Oh, wow.
The one doctor told me it looks like he has trisomy 18. And so that I knew what that was. I come from a very scientific medical background. And so I was just like in shock. And I'm like, oh God, he's not gonna make it,
No.
And they said he was just very underdeveloped. They were going to take him away. I wasn't even allowed to see him. They were going to take him away. I had to go to another room. They were going to go, I don't know what they were doing, put monitors on him, all that stuff. Okay. So then my husband gets there as they're taking him away. I was allowed to come look at him, but we weren't allowed to hold him or anything like that, which was very difficult. That lasted for about 3 days. To where we weren't allowed to hold him or anything. And they were just running all kinds of tests. And there were some medical issues that popped up right away that they were just trying to monitor and stabilize. Luckily, one of the genetic doctors that we have now showed up on the 3rd day. And he was like, hey, it's not trisomy 18. So that was a huge relief, but it is something. It is something, but it's not that. So I was like, okay, thank God, and he kind of, went up and down, like, the whole time we were in the hospital. There would be good days and bad days, but luckily at least that was gone. So we were in the NICU for about a month. That was really hard because again, we have a 2-year-old at home who one day I was there and the next day I was not.
Where's
and
mom?
Yeah. And I was always there. And like I mentioned, we don't have family around. So like I was always there. And so that was really, really hard. And then juggling, not being able to be at the NICU all day, every day. That was very, very difficult, So it was just like this back and forth for about a month until we could take him home.
I just want to pause you for a second because, I had 2 NICU babies, right?
Mm-hmm.
One was 28 days. The one was shorter. And I just want to hit on that, like what you said, like when we hear our friends are in the NICU or they've gone through a NICU experience, I don't think anyone can fully appreciate what you're saying on that roller coaster feel unless you've lived it, right?
Absolutely.
Like, and I get goosebumps seriously just remembering like that dread when you had to go home, yet you needed to go home to go see your baby, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like I just can remember feeling like, where am I supposed to be? I never knew. Right?
Oh, that was the worst because I felt guilty for not being there for my toddler.
Right.
And then I felt it was honestly the worst. My husband could go at night to stay with him and I couldn't. And I was his mom because I couldn't drive. Number one, I couldn't drive because I had a C-section. Number two, I have a 2-year-old at home,
I needed to.
And that was the worst time. And back then, this wasn't that long ago, but this was in 2015. Back then they didn't have cameras and stuff. Now they do to where you can kind of at least watch. At least a lot of hospitals do.
I had a camera with one and not with the other. Yeah.
Yeah. But they didn't. And so I think that would have helped a little bit,
Yeah, I hear you. Well, we'll circle back to that at the end, but I had to pause because again, I mean, if you've got a friend or a family member that's walking through that, like, I just can't urge you enough to recognize that they're not showing you everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's this thing happening inside and your hormones are trying to come back together.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a mess. So, okay, sorry. So
So, let's see. So we left the NICU, after about a month of being there.
And at that point, did you have a conclusive idea? Okay. Wow.
No. So they had done tons of testing on genetics and all of that came back okay. And I was like, okay, that's weird, but maybe this was just some fluke. Maybe this was just some weird fluke. Like something happened in utero and it was just a fluke. And he had some other issues. Like his heart had heart murmurs and a VSD. And so as we went through, it started to get better, but like there was tons of specialists we needed to follow up with. he had brain bleeds, but they weren't so severe to where they were like concerned that he would not be there mentally,
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
just little things like that where like we literally had to see every doctor you could think of when we left the
Wow.
NICU.
Wow.
He also failed his newborn hearing screen, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But they were like, oh, maybe he just had fluid in his ears or he was tired or something. Okay. But as soon as I got him home, I was like, nah, like something's not right. So we have a 2-year-old, at home. It's loud, it's crazy, typical boy, just like bouncing off the walls. And Freddie never responded to anything. And I was like, oh no, we're gonna go to this audiology appointment and I can hope for the best, but something's just not right. So that was the first thing. We found out he was profoundly deaf. So I was like, oh great, of course it's like, the extreme. We can't just get tubes for fluid. He's completely deaf. He also had a rare type of hearing loss. And they're like, this one's a little difficult because there's not a lot of research on it. I'm like, okay, great. So we're seeing like all these specialists and we go to follow up with genetics. And I remember going in there thinking, this is going to be another one we're going to check off the list. Like, he's little, he's underdeveloped, there were some things that happened, but as we were going to certain specialists, he started improving and we were checking things off the list. And, we were like, great, this is going to be another one. And I remember being there by myself again, because I was like, we're just going, for a checkup and we're just going to check this off the list. And he's looking at him and he starts spouting off all this stuff to his assistant. And I'm just sitting there like, that's my baby you're talking about. What are you talking about? I remember just sitting there thinking, what is he saying? Why is he calling all this stuff out to her? And then at the end, he was like, okay, I want to run these 2 tests. And I think, there's something else going on here. And I was like, no. Like I thought we were just checking things off. I thought we were just going to, go on with our lives. And yes, he was deaf, but we're going to figure that out, and like, it'll be okay. So they did this last round of genetic testing. So at this point, he was around 6 months old. It took until he was around 9 months old to find out he had a rare genetic disorder. And so he has a variant on one of his genes, a MED12 gene. And the complicated part about that is then you are clinically matched with a diagnosis that matches things they found with that gene variant. So meaning they diagnosed him with FG syndrome, but his specific variant has never been found before. So we just say he has a MED12 disorder.
So you're learning. This is an evolving.
Yeah. So this is like, nobody has what he has. Does he have some variation of certain syndromes that have been found based off of this genetic disorder? Yes, but that doesn't mean he specifically has, FG syndrome, which is what they've clinically diagnosed him with. But with that being said, it really did answer some things like, okay, that's why, he possibly was born deaf. That's why he has some developmental disabilities, that's why, like, just certain other things about him. With the brain bleeds, he has cerebral palsy as well. So when he was born, he couldn't use his right hand. The right side of his body is affected way more than the left. So it's been a lot, but getting that diagnosis was super helpful because then it opened a door to more resources as far as therapies and people listening, to that something's not right and you need that extra support and to try to get him what he needs to be the best version of himself. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my language too. The best version of our kids, right? That's all we want. And you mentioned the diagnosis helping. I think that's also something that, again, if you're not in this world, you don't really fully appreciate. I actually have more empathy for the parent that's just begging to get an answer.
Oh, that's the worst. You just need an answer. Yeah.
So that they can get the support. Versus you or I, right? We walk into a room, we've got a diagnosis and people are asking us, here's the 8 options. Do you want all 8 or what do you want? And that other mom or dad who can't get the 8 presented to them because they simply don't have that diagnosis. It's very interesting how it actually can play in your favor and then hurt you in other areas. Like it's just
absolutely. It's the worst to hear that there is something. But then on the other side, it is good to your point, because then you don't have to worry all the time. Like, I know something's off, but I don't have an answer for it. At least you have that answer and you can get some sort of help, even if there's not a cure. or anything like
Yeah.
that, you at least
Yeah.
get more support medically and,
Yeah.
for therapies and things like that. Yeah.
So tell me, what has been your biggest surprise as far as the support that you have seen or not seen at this point?
So many things, probably. I could
Ta-
talk about this like
I
for
know.
hours and
And
hours and
I'm
hours.
passionate about it too. But if what's the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe the most
Okay.
recent thing
I
that
think,
you've kind of walked through.
gosh, I mean, I think, so he went to a special school there for a little while because of his deafness. And so we did that for a while. Then transitioning to mainstream school was the first thing we did this year. And that was very emotional for me because he's coming from a very supportive small community where there's kids like him, even though he's different. They all had hearing loss, for example, so they could all relate to each other. And then we're going to try to mainstream with therapies and with support, of course. Like, he's not going to ever be in a typical classroom, but that was really difficult for me too, emotionally. But then I was surprised because we had probably this diagnosis. We felt very supported when we went in for our IEP.
Awesome.
Yeah. And that we got the services that he needed. That scared me because your school district can be different,
Yep.
and there are some that don't provide great services,
Well, the horror stories are real, right? Like,
they are very real. And so I
yeah,
was very scared, very,
yeah,
very
me too.
scared. And we picked the school system for a reason, because we heard great things about it, but you never know, you
Mhm.
just truly never know. So I would say that was a nice surprise. I think the other thing is more on the negative side is just people not understanding. I hope that I didn't say some of the things that people say to me before I had him, not that they mean it in any mean way, but it is just appalling, some of the things people say. I had someone say to me, and he's not even severely disabled, but you can tell there's something off, when you meet him. But I had someone say to me one time, like, "What's wrong with him?
Mm.
What's wrong with him?" And my husband was there, luckily, and he was like, "Well, what's wrong with you?" And he's just very bold, and I was just like standing there, I didn't know what to say. Or my aunt one
Yeah.
time, she was like, "Oh, it must be so nice he can't hear you when he takes a nap, so you don't have to worry about waking him up." And I was like, if
Oh,
only he could hear me, I would give anything for that, and
but
I know people don't mean it, but
no.
that has been the most shocking part, is the things people say to you,
Yep.
and they just don't have a clue.
No. I want to tell people it's being completely silent is pretty awful. Like when you can tell, I don't know, when people say nothing at all, I almost find myself being like, okay, this is hard. But then the alternative is sometimes they do open their mouth. And I'm like, bummer. I wish you would have just stayed silent.
Yeah, and I know people mostly, I'll say this,
100%.
mostly come from a good place, but it's like,
100%.
wow, I hope I never have said that to somebody, and I'm always very cognizant now of what I'm saying to people. I don't know if I'm sure you have been through this, but I know people come from a good place, but they want to always share a story. Like, well, I know, my niece has this, and she's graduated college and is married and blah blah blah. I'm like, that's great, but that is not our story. And I'm not trying to diminish what Freddie can do, but I do have to be realistic in the reality of
Yep.
what he has and what we're going through. And I don't know what he's going to be like.
Right.
Um, but you really have to be careful to compare. And I know people want to share because it's like a connection, like, oh well, I know this, but every situation is different.
I think that what I can extract from what you said, Susan, maybe you can agree or disagree here, but sometimes we just need to celebrate right now. And you don't have to tell me a story about a successful 50-year-old or 60-year-old who's deaf and lived on their own, or who has Down syndrome and didn't have to stay at home forever. It's great. That's awesome. But can we just celebrate that right now he picked up that spoon and he ate pudding by himself? Like, isn't he great? Like, I think being in the moment is probably the best way you can support us. At least for me, right? Because if I
Yes.
let my head go a year from now or 6 years from now, it gets kind of scary. And
It's very scary.
I just need to live today, Is that a fair way to say it?
That's 100% fair. And
Yeah.
I say this to a lot of people. Some people will ask me, do you think he'll be able to live on his own? Okay.
It's
To
the
your
number
point,
one question.
I don't know. And
I
so
don't
what
either.
I'm doing
Yeah.
right now is I'm living this year, this week, this day, and I'm giving him what he needs to, like I said, be the best version of himself that he can be right now. I
I
have
love that.
no clue what the future holds, and I
Yeah.
cannot let myself go there. Do I think about it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does it scare me and make me emotional? Absolutely. But I have no crystal ball of what's going to happen. And so I can't let myself go there. We are just focusing on each day, each week, each month, each year, and being
Yeah.
surprised. Honestly, it surprises us in good ways mostly. There are some negatives still, there are some hard times, but he's come so far from what we thought he would be
Yeah.
that we have to celebrate that too.
Yeah.
Like he's here,
Exactly.
he's here, he's alive, and we're just doing the best we can. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like he's pretty incredible. So you've got a couple different fronts from I don't know if I should call it dual diagnosis or not. Maybe I
Hmm.
don't know if that's the right way to say
Yeah,
it,
there's
but
a few different things going on. Yeah.
okay. So if we're thinking about the mom or dad or caregiver that is dealing with a child or someone in their life that is now facing each side of the coin, right? So if we start with just losing their hearing, right, and some
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
practical advice you have for the new mom in that space or new dad, what would you say to them just starting out?
So the hearing loss journey alone was a big one for us because we did not know anybody who was deaf, and the deaf community has come a long way. But I could talk about that for another hour. It's very divided still, meaning there are still a lot of people that don't believe that you should get your child implanted, for example, and they feel like it should be their choice. I'm going to be honest, if you do your education, if you wait, there's a less likelihood that it will work. And it's not about changing them, it's about providing the support that they need to be the best that they can be. And I think there's a lot of miseducation there. Um, I think I would recommend that you do your research, but not let people scare you in your decision making. That's my biggest piece of advice. Talk to a lot of different people.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so practical. And you're right. Like, I think it is so personal, but that's a really great thing just to steer people towards broadening their knowledge if they haven't.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes,
No, that's
because
really
we
good.
were going into this like not knowing anything, and
Right.
so it was really important for us to like, I don't know, maybe because we're both like sort of researchers, but it was just really important for us to like figure out what's the best thing we can do for him.
Yep.
I always tie it back to like, maybe people don't agree with me and that's okay, but this was our thought process. Like if you lose a leg, you have a prosthetic, right? No
Right.
one's judging
Right.
you on that.
Right.
Why would we not try to give him a world of hearing, even if it's different, even if it didn't work, because it can only help. It would be another big hurdle to go through to not have that, and he still is deaf. I think that's what people don't understand. He has cochlear implants, he still is deaf without them. So he, and even with them, he hears different than us and has to have specialized therapy. It's not just a cure. So anyway, I would just recommend you do your research, but make the decision that works for you and your family.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that boldly. And then what about from the genetic piece that you've had
Mhm.
to learn and navigate? Because that's very different than like a trisomy 21, 18,
Mhm.
19. So what would you say to that parent or caregiver?
So I would say the struggles there have been like, we don't have a community, for example. Like, okay, Down syndrome, you typically know, even though there's variations of people with Down syndrome, all spectrums, of course, there's a group. People recognize Down syndrome. They have support for that. You can talk to people about that. Same thing for some of the other big ones, like where they're well-known names, you have a community there. For one that is rare, and even if you have others who have a similar genetic makeup, you don't just have like a label, which can be really hard because you're like, I'm just like learning about this on my own. Doctors don't even really understand it. We're just treating everything one off instead of like holistically. So I think even though you have your answer, it can still feel really difficult sometimes because you're searching. I would just go back to what I said before. Try to stay in the moment and just help deal with whatever issues at hand and get the help and support for that, and take it day by day, because you can really go down a rabbit hole of like, well, is he going to be like this? Or like, you can just really go down a dark hole. And so I would just go back to what we were talking about, like just try to take it day by day and fight for the supports that you need and get that support, any way you can, honestly.
Oh, I love that. Any stigmas that you wish could be fought down? Anything that you're just kind of surprised? We talked a little bit about some of the language that people use, but is there any specific theme that you're just like, man, I'm so passionate to make sure people know that my child who just happens to have low hearing or happens to deal with
Mhm.
a genetic, they need to make sure they don't think this. Is there something that you would call out?
I would say one thing I've noticed with him going into school with other kids who are more typical, okay, is I didn't think it would start so young, them sort of singling him out. I thought honestly this year was going pretty well until he came home recently and told me about an incident at school with some of his best buddies that he has, and them calling something out about him, meaning like he's slower, he's not as fast. He like really didn't start walking and running until this year, honestly, without pain and stuff like that. And so they apparently were making fun of him for being the slow one. And so I think really educating your kids, and I try to do this with my oldest too. Like we all get made fun of for something. We all have something different about us, okay? But really talking about trying to be inclusive, talking to your child about how everybody has something unique to them. And, for this friend in particular, I had seen him and I was like, hey, I heard this, um, does Freddie ever treat you that way? And he was like, no. And I said, then why would we, make fun of our friends? Shouldn't we be helping him and including him, And he made some comment about like, well, this other kid is the one that does it. And I said, okay, but then shouldn't we stick up for our friend and help say, hey, that's not okay, So I really think it's twofold. Like helping your kids realize there are differences, and it doesn't have to be just because you have a disability. Everybody's different in their own way, and how to be more inclusive and understanding of that. And then also make sure they have a voice. Like I've really had to teach him to stick up for himself. And it can be hard because you want to make friends and you don't want to make somebody mad, because then you lose that friend. And especially when you're a little bit different, you probably don't want to do that, but saying, hey, I'm not going to play with you if you're going to talk to me that way, or I'm going to go hang out with this other person or whatever, and just really giving them that confidence and support and being able to advocate for themselves too, I think is very important, whether you have a special needs child or not, but especially for special needs kids. I think those are the big things I've seen, and I can't believe have happened so early. And I, try to instill in my oldest as well. And,
Yeah.
would really, really educate other people on too, is
Oh,
trying to, yeah.
it's so good. It's so good. And man, Sue, I could just get you to talk forever on here.
I
And
know. I was like,
don't,
wait, that's why we have to meet up. So
I know we're definitely going to. And I will tell you, I don't be surprised if I ask you to come back and talk about something specific, because I just really feel like our hearts are aligned on a lot of things. And you've got a lot of really cool things that I think parents in the community need to hear. So I hope you'll come back and talk to me. But I just want to say something first, and then I'm going to ask you one last question.
okay.
I hope you'll receive this. I am so thankful that Freddie has you. And I'm so thankful that just to have you in this community, because you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And just the encouragement you've given me in this 25 minutes we've had together, I can't tell you how much it fires and lights up my soul to know that there's another woman in the trenches beside me, and we
Yes.
are fighting the good fight. And I know there's a lot of listeners that are sitting here going, man, yes, like it's so good to know that we're not alone. Right. And so,
Yes.
just know, I mean, my faith system, I love God and Jesus, and I just know that God has such huge plans for you and your son. And I am excited to have a seat to watch it. So
Thank you.
anyway,
And I honestly appreciate you creating this platform. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, someone's done it, because like we talked about earlier before we came on here, it can be very easy to not talk about these things.
right.
But then to your point, you feel very alone if you don't.
Yeah,
And if you don't hear these other stories, even if they might be different than yours, there's still a commonality. And then you can
very.
find your people for sure that
Yeah.
get it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thanks for saying that. Okay. I want to know your absolute favorite thing about your kids. Tell me
So
about
many
them.
things. So many things. So Freddie is, I call him my Sour Patch, okay, because he can be the most ornery little thing, but he's also
Oh,
the sweetest thing you've ever met. He has the best smile. He's very, very observant. He notices everything. He is the hardest worker probably you'll ever meet. He, has had to work so hard and barely complains. And most things adults would not do, he's done a lot of work. My oldest, he's very caring and independent, and his life had to change, quickly. And I think it's going to make him a different person than maybe some of his other peers. And I can already see that. But
yep.
I think in the best way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, these siblings, that's probably the topic we'll talk about because I think
Yeah, we should.
there's a lot to unpack there as well. And so,
Yeah.
well, I hope that I can meet Freddie. I would love for you to meet
Yes.
my Preston as well.
I would love that.
And
Yes.
thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time,
Thank you.
Suz.
I really appreciate
So
it.
how do we find you, Suz? If people want to
Oh
find you,
gosh.
whether it
Okay.
be for business reasons and I'll make sure and put this down into the description so
Sure.
you guys can get to her. But how do we find Suz if we have questions or want to reach you or anything like that?
Yes. So I tried to keep it simple recently. I changed my name on there. It's Suz.Conley. So super easy to find me on Instagram. Like you said, I can send you my link. That's the fastest way to find me. I'm always on Instagram. I do TikTok for fun, but that's more of my outlet. So
Same. Great. And then I'm going to ask you to send me a few links to your favorite organizations. We'll put that down here as well below for some resources. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.